Miracle Boyd
Think of like the violence that's happening.
and Carrie Hogan, two lifelong Chicago residents from two different neighborhoods and two different perspectives.
Sometimes I do get numb.
Boyd grew up on Chicago's gritty South Side. Just 21 years old, she says she's already seen far too much gun violence.
My brother was shot entering my freshman year of high school.
Her father, brother, and uncle have all been shot. One, she said, was mistaken identity. Another, a case of wrong place, wrong time. Many of those she grew up with have also been victims of gun violence.
I can count on more than both of my hands how many classmates have died, because it's more than 10 since elementary school all the way through high school. I wouldn't like to say that some of our high schools and some of our youth are cursed, but that's what it's seeming to be.
I literally dropped to the ground. I was laying on the sidewalk thinking, I don't want to be the next person on the news that's killed by a stray bullet.
Hogan is an attorney who lived in a North Side neighborhood for nearly 2 decades and saw it change after a family member was shot during a botched carjacking.
Get your crispy toast.
Hogan and her 2 chocolate labs packed up and moved to a sleek neighborhood in the center of the city.
I'm living in a condo, so I have a door person now. I have 24-hour security. It just seems safer. It might be an illusion, but I feel safer here because there are more people around and the neighborhood is lit up.
Ask each of them their top issue in tomorrow's nonpartisan mayoral election, and it may sound as if they're in agreement.
Public safety is the #1 issue, and if we could address public safety, then we could address crime.
For me, crime affects everything. It's the only issue that matters in this election.
But for Carrie, the answer is more police.
You have less police generally, and then the police that are left don't feel empowered to really do anything. And so that is a perfect formula for crime.
And from Miracle's point of view, the police are irrelevant.
The police show up after the crime has already been committed. They don't show up to prevent.
Public safety means very different things to very different people in Chicago.
Heather Sharon is a reporter for WTTW, Chicago's PBS station. She says sentiments about crime in the city are as much about perception as reality.
We are seeing crimes and high-profile crimes in neighborhoods that are not used to being in the headlines for those reasons. And that, I think, can add to sort of people's sense that, well, I used to feel safe here, but I don't feel safe anymore. And that is really, in many ways, disconnected from what the reality of crime is.
Shootings spiked in Chicago during the pandemic. More than 800 people were murdered in 2021 alone. While the number of homicides dropped last year, reports of violent crimes continued to rise, up 12% since 2019, the year of the last citywide election. A recent poll found that nearly 2/3 of Chicago residents say they feel unsafe from gun violence and crime.
I'm not going to rest until we're the safest big city in the country.
That could spell trouble for Mayor Lori Lightfoot as she runs for a second term. She faces a crowded field. 8 challengers are trying to make her the first incumbent in decades to be defeated for re-election.
What we don't need is somebody who doesn't support the police and in fact wants to divert resources from the police to other projects.
The candidates are drawing sharp contrast over public safety and the city's police department, which remains under a consent decree imposed after the 2014 fatal police shooting of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. Lightfoot points to a record as mayor, hiring more than 950 police officers last year and removing more than 12,000 guns from the city's streets.
We're bending the curve on violent crime.
Every one of Lightfoot's challengers has pledged to replace the police superintendent she appointed. Teacher turned Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson
what's up, Chicago?
Says he'd reallocate funds in the police department and focus on the root causes of crime by investing in schools and housing.
Over 40% of the violence that happens in the city of Chicago happens in 6% of the neighborhoods where I live.
Let's get Chicago back on track.
Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia says he'd increase staffing and improve data collection.
People need to feel safe to do business.
Balance for mayor.
And current frontrunner Paul Vallis, the former CEO of Chicago's schools, promises to hire 1,800 new officers with a focus on community policing.
Community policing is critical because, you can't have half of the high priority 911 calls not being responded to.
That's an approach Carrie Hogan says turned this one-time Lightfoot voter onto a new candidate this year.
Why did you decide on Paul Vallas?
We have to give power back to our police. We have to put more police back on the streets. We have to start policing our city again to keep it safe. So Paul Vallas is the person that I think has the most rational, reasonable policies in that regard.
We're going to turn it over to our candidates.
In the closing days of the campaign, Miracle Boyd and the gun violence prevention organization she works with held a forum for Chicago's youth to engage directly with the candidates.
Our communities are suffering. Our youth are dying from gun violence.
Of the 4 candidates polling in double digits, only Johnson showed up.
I believe a better, stronger, safer Chicago is possible. We can build that together.
Johnson's plan for community-based interventions resonated with Boyd and was a big reason she says she's voting for him.
He's actually been in the communities, been on our talks, been on Zoom with us. The citizens of Chicago is calling for treatment, not trauma, and not police to show up.
While voters have been casting ballots for a month, it may be weeks before they know which candidate will be tasked with trying to lower crime in Chicago and to restore faith in the police department. If no candidate wins a majority of votes tomorrow, the top 2 finishers advance to a runoff in April. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.